Welcome everybody to Sephardic World. Our speaker today is Felicia Waldman. She is Associate Professor at the Center for Hebrew Studies, Faculty of Letter at the University of Bucharest in Romania. She coordinates the Center and the Goldstein Goren MA program in Hebrew Culture and Civilization. She's published 4 books, including Tales and Traces of Sephardic Bucharest, which I have a copy, thank you, as well as over 50 articles, and she's co-edited 4 volumes. She's deputy head of the Romanian Delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, member and former chair of the organization's education working group, and member of its committee on the Roma Genocide. Before we start, I will just allow everybody else in who's waiting, and we'll start to record. So welcome, Felicia, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I will walk you through the history of the Sephardim in the Romanian Principalities. And I will highlight the story of a particular family which I documented for the conference in London, and which I'm going to speak a little bit about again. So now, okay, right. So Spanish Jewish merchants actually crossed the Romanian Principalities even before the 1492 expulsion. They seem to have been the first who used, long prior to 1480, the alternative route Constantinople, Silistra, Galați to reach Western Europe. But it was only after their settlement in the Ottoman Empire that the Sephardim started crossing the border into Wallachia and Moldova regularly and established local communities in Bucharest, Iași, Craiova, Turnu Severin, Corabia, Calafat, Turnu Măgurele, Ploiești, Giurgiu, Constanța, Brăila, etc., most of which are towns on the Danube or on the seaside because they were interested in trade primarily. Later on, Sephardim also came from Vienna or from various Italian towns. Some wise rulers of Wallachia and Moldova, who saw the economic potential of these merchants and travelers, encouraged their settlement here, giving them various facilities. According to Jewish historian Meir Avraham Halevi, considering that the first Sephardim were documented in Wallachia as early as 1496, the history of the Sephardim in the Romanian Principalities can be divided into 2 distinct periods. From 1496 until 1711, when rulers started being appointed by the Supreme Court from among the rich Greek merchants of the Fanar neighborhood of Constantinople who were able to buy the throne, and then 1711 to 1821, the year of the Greek revolt against the Turkish rule, the Zavera, which had profound bearings on the Romanian Principalities as well. In Bucharest, the first proof of a Sephardic presence dates back to 1550, when documents issued by Prince Mircea Ciobanu speak about Jews who owned stores, which is very unusual for that time. There is also a responsa of the Rabbi of Salonika, Samuel de Medina, concerning the killing of an Ottoman Jew in the town's vicinity. This is confirmed by a second responsa issued by Rabbi Iosef Caro of Nicopole in 1559, concerning a similar case in which one can find 2 of the names mentioned in the first responsa, which proves the stability of the respective people in the city. So that shows there was some kind of stability, and Meir Avraham Halevi even says that this must have been accompanied by a cemetery, because he says the first thing that they should have had if they settled was a cemetery. And indeed, we have some mentions, we do not have documents, but we have references, indirect references to a cemetery that was in the vicinity of Bucharest in a small village called Budești. In Moldova, Sephardim emigrated, especially during the reign of Stefan IV, between 1517 and 1527, again in the immediate aftermath of the expulsion. Their number increased with the arrival of fellow Jews from neighboring Ottoman Bulgaria, for economic but also political reasons. The Russian traveler of Dutch descent, Leon Perez Balthazar von Kampenhausen, relates that during the Russo-Turkish War of 1781-1791, when he crossed Moldova, the Ottoman Sephardim settled here during the reign of Stephen IV still spoke and wrote in Spanish, but with Hebrew letters, Ladino, of course. In a travel account of 1619, the great scholar Joseph Solomon del Medigo, former disciple of Galileo Galilei, says that in 1580, the Jewish community of Iași was led by the rabbi, doctor, and Kabbalist Solomon ben Arroyo, a Sephardi of Italian origin, probably a descendant of the Arbib family from Salonika, with whom del Medigo studied for 11 years. The information is confirmed by another traveler, Paolo Benicio of Malta, who crossed the Moldovan capital in 1632. Meyer Abraham Halevi mentions that the rights and duties of the Jewish Guild were established under royal decrees at least starting from 1622, one such document being in his own possession, and reiterated 45 years later in 1666 under another royal decree issued by Prince Alexander Ilias. Sephardic trade between the Ottoman Empire and the Romanian principalities increased in the second half of the 17th century, when we find more and more Spanish Jewish merchants crossing Wallachia and Moldova, and Spanish Jewish creditors giving loans to the local rulers, which indicate their involvement not only in the economy but also in political life. This is also when stable communities start being mentioned, such as the one in Craiova, 1650, or Focșani, 1700. Some princes, like Aaron the Tyrant, imposed high taxes to be able to repay their debts to the Ottoman Sephardic creditors, which often did not help. Others, like Michael the Brave, solved the issue by killing them. Although princes like Radu Leon, Alexander Ilias, or Constantin Brankovan continued to employ Sephardic physicians at their courts and take loans from the Jewish creditors in Constantinople, the end of the 17th century was also the time when religious tolerance towards the Jews began to decrease, a trend reflected in the economic restrictions that started being imposed on them. The climax came in 1714, when Prince Stefan Cantacuzino demolished the Sephardic synagogue in Bucharest and forbade the Jews to gather for prayer. Nevertheless, due to the development of the commercial relations, during the 18th century, Sephardic Jews continued to come from the Ottoman Empire to the Romanian lands. If the 16th century was marked by the personality of Joseph Nasi of the Mendes family, the Portuguese Marano who had so much influence at the Sublime Porte during 1566-1579 that he was granted the title of Duke of Naxos and the Cyclades, and in 1571 Sultan Selim II even offered him the Moldovan throne, which however he was clever enough to refuse. The beginning of the 18th century was undoubtedly marked by Daniel de Fonseca. Equally appreciated in the West and in the Ottoman Empire, de Fonseca was literally kidnapped by Wallachian Prince Nicolas Mavrocordat from the French embassy in Constantinople, where he had served for 17 years, as mentioned in the French ambassador's letter, allowing de Fonseca to enter the service of the Wallachian prince while continuing to grant him French protection. From de Fonseca, we have information about the famous library of Mavrocordat, from which the Marano deciphered and copied several Greek manuscripts, which he then made available to scholars in France and Italy, popularizing in a vast correspondence the prince's collections, which included, just like in Constantin Brankovan's case, a series of Hebrew manuscripts. As de Fonseca himself puts it in a letter of 14 September 1731, sent to the director of the Royal Library in Paris, in the entire Levant, you will not find manuscripts more valuable than those in the library of the Prince of Wallachia, who promised to let me copy those we shall deem necessary. It was in fact de Fonseca and Mendes Bali, another important Ottoman Sephardic merchant and creditor who enjoyed Mavrocordat's appreciation, that convinced the prince to recognize in 1730 the Sephardic community of Bucharest as a separate and independent structure. In 1819, the Spanish community built its biggest and most impressive synagogue, Cajal Grande, the Great Spanish Temple. In a document from 1823 issued by the Austrian agency in Wallachia, the agency expressed its satisfaction at seeing that both the Ashkenazi and Sephardi communities agreed to repay the services brought to them by Angel Breyer, by the way, Moses Gaster's great-grandfather, who had been appointed by the agency. So the daughter of Angel Breyer, Ethel, married Azriel Gaster, who was Moses Gaster's grandfather. Although organized separately, the Sephardic communities generally cooperated with the Ashkenazi ones, willingly or forcibly, as was the famous case of Ploiești in 1830, when Grand Rabbi Chaim Fokshaner from Bucharest intervened in the dispute between the two local communities, ruling that they would have equal rights within a joint structure, but would not be allowed to set up separate ones. In 1838, the two communities sent a joint letter of gratitude to Prince Alexander Ghica, praising his friendly attitude to the Jews, whom he saw as a significant source of communal welfare. We have such examples of incredibly well-intended rulers who really had a very good attitude towards the Jews. The good relations with the authorities are further confirmed by a letter from 1846, in which the leader of the Spanish Jewish community in Bucharest, Iancu Cohe, informed Barbu Știrbei, Minister of the Interior, that the community was building a new synagogue in the Popescu neighborhood, inviting him to be the patron of the new prayer house called the Peace Synagogue Cahal Chicu, the small Spanish temple. Moreover, sometimes a member of one community was hired to serve as rabbi for the other. Iacob Isaac Nemirover and Moses Gaster, both Ashkenazi, served as rabbis of Sephardic communities. The most important Sephardic century remained, however, the 19th century, when a series of important personalities coming from the Ottoman Empire managed to impose themselves as leading figures in the most diverse areas. Some of them were repaid for their contribution by being granted certain facilities, the first generation of bankers, and even individual citizenship for the second generation. We have a description of the Sephardim in 19th century Bucharest from Julius Barash, a doctor who came from Poland and who settled first in Iași and then in Bucharest, where he was able to secure a job as a physician. And he was the founder of the first hospital for children. He was the founder of public medical services, not only for the Jewish population, but also for the general population, the Romanian population. So he was instrumental in medicine, in the development of medicine in Romania. In a publication he printed in Vienna in 1854, he gives a description of the Sephardic population in Wallachia in general and in Bucharest in particular. And he says the other part of the Israelite population here is composed of the so-called French or Spanish Jews. They wear the typical dress of the country, that is Wallachian, and speak among themselves a Spanish Castilian dialect, which is now, of course, more or less corrupt in their mouths. They can only communicate with the Christians and the Polish Jews in Romanian. The Jews of the entire Orient, like, for instance, those of Constantinople, Smyrna, Salonika, are all of the same origin. Among them, there are many rich and considerate families. But not only rich Sephardim arrived in Wallachia, many came as refugees from Bulgaria and Dobroja during the Russo-Turkish War of 1828-1829. In October 1831, in Giurgiu, there were 20 Sephardic merchants who had fled Silistra and who applied for a 3-year tax waiver as war refugees. So even then there was such a thing, just like the Serbs, based on the 1830 law, and their petition was indeed approved. Another 3 Sephardic merchants from Silistra who had taken refuge in Călărași in 1836, when the fortress had surrendered, asked for approval to settle in Bucharest as well. After the organic regulations of 1831 in Wallachia and respectively 1832 in Moldova launched the first legal anti-Semitic measures, many Jews chose to file for the protection of the recently opened consulates of Russia, 1782, Austria, 1783, France, 1796, and Great Britain, 1803. This was the case with several of the important Sephardic bankers coming from the Ottoman Empire, who thus came to be registered in the census of 1838 as Austrian subjects. The Ottoman Empire did not have consulates in the Romanian principalities. The 1848 revolution included among its claims the emancipation of the Jews, not only because a series of Jewish bankers and merchants supported the movement, but also from a genuine awareness of the need to modernize the Romanian principalities. Prince Alexander John Cuza included it among his reforms, but then came the year 1866 when, in the first constitution of Romania, Jews who had previously been considered native and enjoyed certain rights were labeled as foreigners and literally removed from the life of Romanian society. Thus, the Romanian principalities and later on Romania refused to emancipate the Jews, giving preference to individual and selective naturalization, at least until the Constitution of 1923, which provided for the overall naturalization of the Jews for the first time in history. Unfortunately, even this wonder was to last only 15 years, as the 1938 law for the revision of citizenship stripped many of them of it. Between 1880 and 1912, less than 100 Jews were naturalized, besides the 1880 who fought as volunteers during the Independence War of 1877 and who were subsequently granted citizenship. So that gives you an idea about what they were facing. Information about the origin of the Romanian Sephardim, especially those in Bucharest, can be found in the cemetery. Opened in 1865, the Sephardic cemetery hosts Jews who came from Turkey, born in Constantinople, today Istanbul, but also in Smyrna, Izmir, Adrianople, Edirne, born in Greece, Salonika, but also in Ioannina, Italy, born in Caspoli or other towns, Austria, born in Vienna, Serbia, born in Belgrade, Macedonia, born in Skopje, France, even born in Paris, and an impressive number from Bulgaria, half of which were born in Ruse, and the rest in Silistra, Nicopole, Vidin, Varna, Vazargic, and so on. In most cases, the Ottoman Sephardim coming to the Romanian principalities and later on in Romania in the 19th century remained there and brought important contributions to the country's development in the most diverse fields. Bankers like Menachem and Jacques Elias, Mauriciu Blanc, Solomon Halfon, Hillel Manoach, publicity agents like David Adania, mathematicians like David Emanuel and Ernest Abason, literates and journalists like Alexandru Vorna, born Alberto Enrique Samuel Behari Mayor, Raul Siniol, Ezra Al-Hasid, musicians like Clara Haskell, Philip Lazar, Leon Algazi, Mauricio Cohen Lenaro, Alexandru Mandi, Abraham Cohen Bucureșteanu, Benedetto Franchetti, Abraham Levi Vela, Alberto de la Pergola, editors like Leon Alcalai, the Samitka and Benvenisti families, theater actors like Maria Ventura, Alexandru Finzi, Mosco Alcalai, or Rosina Cambos. They were all Sephardic personalities born in Romania. So I will now give you an example of Sephardic life in Romania through the story of the family that I documented for the conference in London, which will give an overview of their connections and their contribution to the development of modern Romania. And we start with Solomon Halfon, who was born in 1790 in Adrianople and who came to Bucharest via Silistra and Brașov. We know from a diary kept by the youngest of his sons, Nisim Halfon, who kept his diary during only 1 year in 1866-1867 in French, and which was translated by his son, one of his sons, and which is preserved until today only in the Romanian translation. We do not have the original, unfortunately, but at least we have the information that was in it. So we know that the paternal grandmother of Solomon Halfon was a descendant of the old and illustrious Sephardic rabbinic family of the Gerons. His paternal grandfather, Joseph Halfon, was a respected member of the Jewish community of Adrianople. He had 2 houses, one in which he lived and one in which he continued to run the family business inherited from his own father. And while he was in Rhodes, his only son Abraham died young. So in 1806, at the age of 70, he retired to the Holy Land. Alone in Adrianople in 1807, so at the age of 17, Solomon married Bulisa, daughter of Michel Politzer, another important notable of the local Jewish community. And they had 3 children, all born in Adrianople, Abraham, Joseph, and Nisim. Sometime between 1820 and 1824, Solomon was appointed vizier of the province's governor general, and in 1824 he followed the letter to his new position as governor of Silistra with the same attributions, taking all his family. By 1827, Solomon started spending time in Bucharest, where his first, the second son of his first child, Abraham, was born, as we shall see. In 1828, he moved with the entire family to Brașov, which was an Austrian city at the time, and started doing business in partnership with the local merchant and banker, George Opran. In 1829, the family finally settled in Bucharest, where Solomon and his partner opened a loan office that started giving credits. In 1832, Solomon founded the Solomon and Halfon and Sons Bank, which would become one of the most important Romanian banks of the 19th century. Run by 3 generations of Halfons, it operated until 1907. By 1833, Solomon was one of the main creditors of the Wallachian state's treasury, both through his bank and through the Halfon Opran loan office, which incidentally also credited the Serbian treasury and Prince Miloš Obrenović respectively. In 1834, Solomon sent Nisim, his youngest son, to Constantinople to spend the next 5 years in the house of Abraham de Camondo to learn how to do business. After obtaining the monopoly on the export of salt from Moldova for the year 1833, the Halfon Opran Loan Company also got the monopoly on the export of salt and wood from Wallachia for the year 1838. In 1838, Solomon won, this time with another partner, the lease for all Wallachian customs, you can imagine, for the period January 1st, 1839, January 1st, 1843. But unfortunately, he died in May 1842 of an unknown stomach illness. So we know all this from the family correspondence, which is preserved in French at the Romanian National Archives, from Romania's 19th century parliamentary records, the financial section, which were published in 1895-96 and are available. There are several books written by Romanian historians about the history of Bucharest. There are also the records of the Sephardic cemetery of Bucharest, which are very relevant because there is in it a lot of information about the most important personalities, such as parents, brothers, children, relatives. So there's a very good source for genealogy there. And Solomon's will, written in Ladino and translated into French by one of his grandsons, Moses Halfon, in 1911. Now, as I showed you in London, I will show you now again the mention of Solomon Halfon in the 1838 census to show you what you are facing when looking at the Romanian source. So the name is right, Halfon Solomon, but the age is wrong. So the age is given as 51, but he was actually 48. He's a merchant and also money changer. So not here, it's mentioned that he's a money changer. Head, Bash is from Turkish, head. His Suditka KK means Austrian subject. I wrote down there, Kaiserlich, Königlich means Austria. So he was an Austrian subject. His wife, Bulisa, was 45, not 40. His son was Nisim, not Lisie. He was 18, not 20, and so on. But what is important is that we see here, even if the ages are wrong, we see here which children were already born by that time. And that is important because in other cases, in the case of another Sephardic family, the information is very important because it shows the children were born before the date which is mentioned in their own documents. So there are documents that mention a date of birth that is actually later, and we know from the census that they were already born by that time. So this is also useful. Now, I have the epitaph on Solomon Halfon's grave, which was transcribed by Julius Barash in a book printed in Vienna, transcribed and transliterated, but unfortunately he did not give the original. So we only have the transliteration, which in my view is wrong. You will be able to see it. I will send the PowerPoint so you can read it, because in my view there are some mistakes here, or anyway it's not clearly written, so it's very hard to read it, but you are welcome to try. So I will send you the PowerPoint and you can try to read it. In any case, it does say about his illness, And it does say that he died very young at the age of 52 for an illness that nobody was able to cure. Now, here we have a map from 1871, where if you look to the left, you will see that it's circled Halfon, which shows that the house of the Halfons was so important that it appears on the map. And then there are only three mentions actually. Havra, if you look a little bit to the right and down, is actually a synagogue. And then there are two more circled on the left, on the right side of the screen as you look. Hillel and Jignitsa. Hillel was another important Sephardic merchant and family. And Jignitsa is the name of the neighborhood. So as you can see from the whole neighborhood, these are the two houses that are mentioned. Right. Now we go to the second generation and we are looking at the three children, Abraham, Joseph, and Nisim. They were all born in Adrianopole and they all lived and died in Bucharest. So in 1825, Abraham married in Adrianopole his first cousin, Buhora Bulisa Lea Politzer. They had three children, one born in Adrianopole, one born in Bucharest, and one born in Brașov, which shows us exactly the stages of their grandfathers' advance in the Romanian principalities. So they came, the whole family, and this is how they moved from one place to another. Following the death of his father, Abraham became the head of the house of Halfon, both in the family and in business, and took over his father's position as one of the leaders of the Sephardic community of Bucharest. Like his father, in 1845, he sent his youngest son, Michel, to Constantinople to learn how to do business from Abraham de Camondos' son, this time, Raphael. And 5 years later, Michel was not only prepared for business, but also married to Raphael's daughter, Rebecca. So this is how the Halfons were related to the Camondos, and this is not the only one. In 1864, Abraham was invited to join the delegation accompanying Prince Alexander John Cuza to Constantinople to obtain the Sultan's investiture. Upon his return, he was decorated by the prince, whose treasurer he was, for his outstanding contribution to the development of the international relations of the young Romanian state, created through the unification of Wallachia and Moldova in 1859. In 1866, the Halfon and Sons Bank facilitated, through its financial connections, the first significant loans contracted by Romania, Stern and Oppenheim. Along the time, it subsidized many strategic loans for the benefit of the government and of the city of Bucharest, and industrial projects, oil, wood, insurances. In 1871, it participated in the setting up of the stock exchange, and in 1880, in the establishment of the Romanian National Bank. Now we have here two articles, one in the Jewish Chronicle and one in l'Université illustrée, which mention that Abraham Halfon was made pro bono consul general of the Ottoman Empire in Romania in 1879. He was until then, as I mentioned, his father was the personal representative of the Sultan, and in 1879, following the independence of Romania from the Ottoman Empire, he was appointed pro bono consul general. We have here two Romanian newspapers which speak about the death and legacy of Abraham Halfon. Why? Because he left a lot of money to Romanian charities, of course to Jewish charities, but also to Romanian charities. And that was very impressive for the Romanian press. Both newspapers that I put here are Romanian. Of course, it was donations were also mentioned in the Jewish press, but it's impressive to see them in the Romanian press because, again, his gesture impressed the Romanian society. He left to orphanages, to medical facilities, and to other hospitals, Romanian hospitals. And we have the obituary of Abraham Halfon from the Bucharest Jewish Archives, which mention quite a number of family members, and that's also very useful for genealogy. Now, we go to the second son, Joseph Halfon. In 1833, Joseph married in Bucharest Rahel Manoach, daughter of merchant and banker Eliezer Hillel Behor Manoach, another leader of the local Sephardic community, who was also the personal representative of the Sultan in the Romanian principalities. They had 6 children, all born in Bucharest. Besides working for the family bank, Halfon and Sons, Joseph also worked for the bank of his father-in-law, as proven by a mortgage loan deed signed by Baron Barbubelu in 1863. He was a constant donor for educational causes, sponsoring particularly Jewish schools in the Ottoman Empire, which shows that although he lived most of his life in Bucharest, he continued to be closely linked to his father's birthplace. And here we have three articles, which mention the donations he made to the schools in the Ottoman Empire, to the schools in Smyrna, Adrianople, and in Salonika. He made donations during his lifetime and through his will after his death. In Edirne, we have even today the Halfon house in the garden of the Edirne synagogue, which has been refurbished recently. And the inscription on the top of the entrance door mentions House of Joseph and Rahel Halfon, 1934. So this is still there. You can see it if you get to Edirne. The last son, Nissim Halfon, after returning from his 5 years with the Camondos in Constantinople, in 1840, Nissim married in Bucharest Leah Hillel, daughter of merchant and banker Abram Hillel, another important member of the Sephardic community. They also had 6 children born in Bucharest, and he was a refined political analyst, which helped the family bank remain safe in times of turmoil, as the Jewish Chronicle would acknowledge in its issue of October 5, 1877. And we have an article which says the bank remained strong during times of crisis. And we have a picture of Nissim, unlike in the other members of the family's case, because this is actually a family painting preserved by one of the heirs of the family. We do not have pictures from the other brothers, and we do not have pictures of Solomon Halfon, the founder of the family. On the right side of the screen, you have a list from Bad Ischl, where the entire family spent a lot of time during summer in the spa for medical purposes. As you can see, in the year of his birth and year of his death, he lived 52 years, exactly like his father. He died young, he had health problems, and he was going to Bad Ischl every summer for many years. And this is a list I found where his name is mentioned, together with other members of the family. Now, let's see his children, the next generation, yes, the third generation, the children of Abraham. He had one daughter, Bulisa Rahel, born in 1826 in Adrianople and raised in Bucharest. But around 1848, she moved back to Adrianople, where she married merchant and banker Nissim Menachem Alfasa, later on one of the leaders of the Jewish community of Constantinople. They had 4 children born in 3 different places. Leon was born in Adrianople, Jacques in Adrianople, Sarah in Constantinople, and Matilde in Vienna. Bulisa Rahel died in 1865 in Constantinople during the cholera epidemic, and Nissim Alfasa died in 1889 in Paris. And you can see on the lower part of the page, there is a letter published by Moise Franco in his essay on the history of Israelites in the Ottoman Empire from the beginning to our days, which was published in 1897. And here there is a letter by, as you can see, Fuad Pasha to the leader of the Turkish Jewish community, the Sephardic community in Constantinople, which among the notables of the community mentions Nissim Alfasa. So he was a very important personality. And the Alfasas were a well-known banking family in the Ottoman Empire. The Alfasa children, Leon was born in Adrianople and died in Paris, and he was the second one to marry a Camondo. He married Clarice de Camondo, the niece of Rebecca de Camondo, the other girl who married into the Halfon family. And he has a very nice story. At the end of the 19th century, he was working for his father-in-law, so for the Camondo family bank, and he actually misinvested. He did not embezzle the funds. He really misinvested quite a lot of money, several million francs. And the result was that the bank was in impossibility to pay some of its debts. And therefore, finally, of course, the Camondos paid the debts and he ran away. He was missing for a number of years. He was hiding and there was a lot of scandal. And there's quite a number of articles in the French press which show how this was dealt with. Actually, how everyone expected the Camondos to save the situation, and they did. And following this, the family, Leon and his wife, had quite some trouble. This was not their only problem. Later on, they had two other financial scandals. So they were on the front page of French newspapers all their lives, but they ended up well in the sense that eventually they managed to be cleared of all this bad publicity, and they ended up quite well. They had 7 children, all in Paris. Only 2 had offspring. They all died very young. All the children died very young. Only 2 of them had 1 girl each. Then there was Jacques, who was born in Adrianople and lived in Paris and died in Paris. He was married in Paris and had no children. Sarah was born in Constantinople. She died in Paris, no children. And Matilde was born in Vienna and died in Bucharest. She lived in Paris as a young child, but then in 1885, she married in Bucharest to the widow of another family member, Leon Isaac Mircuș, a very important banking family from Bucharest. Now, the second child of Abraham, Buhor Sabetai, who was born in 1827 in Bucharest, he lived and worked in the shadow of his father, taking care of the family business, did not marry, had no children, resided all his life in Bucharest, but died and was buried in Nice in 1880. And we have an article in the Jewish Chronicle mentioning this death, this sudden death. And we have a picture of him, which is also surprising because this was actually in a book. We don't have any family pictures. Then the last child of Abraham, Michel, was born in 1829 in Brașov. He lived in Bucharest until the age of 16 when he moved to Camondo, as I said. 5 years later, he married Rebecca de Camondo, who died very young in Nice. They had 4 children, all born in Constantinople. But in 1869, as you probably know, the whole family, including Michel and his children, relocated to Paris on Rue Manceau 60, the picture on the right, where he lived all his life. And as you know, the 2 other Camondos, both number 61 and number 63 on Rue Manceau. So all these 3 houses were Camondo properties, and they are all surviving. The properties are there, still there today. One of them is the famous Camondo Museum. We have some documents regarding Michel's death. We have an article from Le Gaulois which shows he was respected and appreciated in France, despite the fact that actually he was mostly, he was mostly a rentier, as they called it in France. He never worked, so he did not do business as he was expected because he lived on his father-in-law's banking properties and revenues. So then we have Michel Halfon's children. Now, he had one daughter, Regina, who was born in Constantinople, and she married in Paris Isaac Hillel Manoach. Now, this is really funny because Isaac Hillel Manoach was brother to the wife of Joseph Halfon. So Hillel Manoach was actually brother-in-law to his wife's grandfather. This is very Jewish. This is very Sephardic. So because of the difference in age, they were actually of the same age, but in family line, they were from different generations. They had 3 children. So the first one was born in London, the second one in Nice, and the third one in Paris. And of these, only one of the children had one son who converted to Christianity. So today there is no one bearing this name now from this side of the family. Now it is important to mention that the girl, Irene, married composer and conductor Camille Erlanger and had Philippe Erlanger, the founder of the Cannes Film Festival. So this is the connection between the Cannes Film Festival and the Sephardim from Romania. Then there was Salomon, who was born in Constantinople and again moved to Paris, as I said, who married Alice Laurence Rodriguez Pereira. Now, Rodriguez Pereira was also a very important banking family. The family was actually in France. They were also from Spanish descent, as the name shows, of course. They were very important already from the 18th century. The family had several banks and several important businesses. And with this marriage, Salomon actually connected again the Halfons to one of the most important families in Europe. They didn't have children. They adopted a girl who married a Spanish diplomat. They had two girls, one married in Paris but died young without children, the other one born in Madrid, again, not married, not children. So from these children, there is no one today. Isaac and Regina, I found the announcement of their marriage and their marriage certificate. So we have lots of information here about who attended. And it's interesting to see that the witnesses to the wedding were the Ottoman consul in Paris and the Romanian consul in Paris. So they were so important that even the consuls themselves were witnesses to the wedding. In terms of, as I said, Salomon Halfon and Laurence Halfon, they were both officers of the Légion d'honneur, and we have here because they were both awarded this by the French authorities for their services to the French economy, of course. And then there are two more children, two more girls, Hortense, who married Alexander Elissen, again, an important banking family, but this time from Germany. So this is the first time that the Sephardic family of the Halfons thinks it's more important to be married to get connected to another banking family than to be connected to a Sephardic family. So with this marriage, they already intermarry with Ashkenazi families. Elissens and then the Lazards. One of the girls married the Lazard, which is also from the German Ashkenazi banking system. And then again, another girl married Hellbrunner. So you can see that they are all going towards the German banking system now. And the last girl is, and also I have to stress that from their children, from the 5 children they had, 3 children died in Auschwitz. So one in Warsaw, one in Auschwitz, and one in Buchenwald. So 3 of their children died during the Holocaust. Then there is Esther Ernestine, who married her uncle, Moses Halfon. And it's interesting. I was going to underline that despite these intermarriages, there are several marriages with first cousins or uncles. Despite these marriages, it's interesting to see that there are no idiots in the family. There are no people affected by these intermarriages, which is very strange indeed. So Esther Ernestine married her uncle, and despite the fact that she was born in Constantinople, she was married in Paris, and she was, interestingly enough, when she got married, she was mentioned as a Romanian citizen, which is very strange because she was not a Romanian citizen, but that's what it's written in the French marriage certificate. And then they lived actually most of the time in Bucharest. So she died in Paris indeed, and she is buried in Paris, but most of the time they lived in Bucharest. And I found information about the parties she was giving, the literary salons that she was organizing. So she was in Bucharest most of the time. Of their 3 children, Abraham Georges André died for France in 1917. He was not a French citizen, but he fought for the French army, and he died in 1917, and he was made a citizen, and he was awarded a Medal of Honor posthumous after his death. Right, and then we have on the left side the French document showing that André died for France, and on the right side his Robert Halfon's birth certificate. Now, Joseph's children, the second son of Solomon Halfon, we have Esther Else, who was born in Bucharest, and in 1848 she married in Bucharest. She lived in Bucharest with her husband, had 9 children, all born in Bucharest, but she died in Vienna. She moved to Vienna, and on the right you have her grave in Vienna today, which is still preserved in very good condition. So she died there in 1898, and she's buried with some other members of the family in Vienna. She had quite a number of children. She had one girl who was, again, born in Bucharest, lived in Bucharest, but again, she died in Vienna and it was buried in Vienna. Then there is a boy, David, who was born in Bucharest and lived in Bucharest and died in Bucharest. Then there was Sentov, and it's interesting to see that Sentov also married a second cousin. Leonora Bahari was a second cousin. They had 4 children. Some of them, interestingly enough, they were all born in Bucharest, except for the last one who was born in Vienna. And they moved, some of them moved to other areas. And you can see Eleanor died in New York, which is very strange. Adolf was a medical doctor from Vienna University, and I found his file in the university. He was a very appreciated student. Anna and Ezra. Ezra also was in Bucharest all the time. We have here Helen and Eleanor Semo on the way to New York. These are the manifests of the ship on which they traveled. And the last children of Esther Else, Rachel was in Bucharest all the time. She was born in Bucharest, lived in Bucharest, died in Bucharest, and she was married to a very important doctor, Moritz Lempart, Simon Moritz Lempart. The son, he was a dentist, and he was the son of one of the founders of the School of Medicine in Bucharest. His father, in 1852, was one of the founders of the University of Medicine. Then there was Solomon and Demeter, and you can see a picture of Rachel, Semo Lempart, and the death announcements for the family members. Now, in terms of Joseph's children, there is one more interesting case, and that is Isidore, who was born in 1840 in Bucharest. In 1873, he married in London Sarah Rothschild, but they actually lived in Paris until Sarah died prematurely in 1899. He then married Rosie Helen Stiebel in Paris in 1902, but they actually lived in Florence, where he died in 1905. But Rosie died in 1930 in Switzerland. So this family moved all over, but they had no children. So there is nobody bearing their name today. And we have information about their marriage in the Jewish Chronicle, which is again relevant for the information about the family. Now, then we have Joseph, Joseph's most important son in terms of legacy, and that is Solomon J, because there are several Solomons in this generation, and they had to be separated by the initial of their father. So Solomon J, born in 1845 in Bucharest, married in 1869 his first cousin, Esther Ernestine Elias, again, first cousin marriage. She was the most longevous in the family. She died at 91 in 1941. They had 7 children, all born in Bucharest. Solomon was the leader of the Sephardic community of Bucharest from the death of his uncle Abraham in 1884 until his own demise in 1913. And here we have the decree granting Solomon the title of officer of the Romanian crown and then commander of the Romanian crown, which shows his good relations with the authorities, which also benefited the community as well. Solomon's children, Joseph, who died very young at the age of 25 during a trip to Mexico, and in his name, his father gave an important donation to the University of Bucharest, 20,000 francs gold, which were used for the next 50 years to give prizes and scholarships to Romanians. No Jew benefited from this scholarship or prize because Jews were, of course, excluded from the benefits of the university. So then there are a few other children who did not necessarily stand out through something special. So they are just interesting cases of moving from one place to another, but they are not relevant in terms of impact on culture and economy. We have here the letter announcing the death of Joseph's son Isidore in Mexico, and also the list of benefit of his things. Now, this is interesting. The only member of the family who ended up in Israel is Solomon's last daughter, Sarah Lala, who was born in 1889 in Bucharest, who married composer and conductor Otto Zellberg, and who had one son. They moved to Israel. Well, actually, they moved to Palestine. At the time, there was no Israel, it was Palestine. So they moved in 1937 to Palestine. This is the only member of the family who ended up in Palestine. And because their son was young, he was drafted in the British Army. And he fought during the First World War as the British soldier, actually as a Palestinian in the British Army. And he was taken prisoner immediately. In 1940, he was taken prisoner. And we have his letters, the original letters from 1940 until 1944. He wrote to his uncle Raphael in Bucharest about his fate in this camp, in the German camp where he was held. Luckily, he was held as a British officer. He was not held as a Jew. So he survived the war and he lived until 1980 in Israel. So this is an interesting case. Then there are 2-3 more children who are not necessarily relevant in terms of what they did, but we have several other family members who married into important families, the Elias Rizzo, the Mirkush, as I said, these were important bankers. And we also have an interesting case, and this is it. On the left side, there is Philip Lazar. I mentioned him earlier. He's one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century. He lived in France. He was born in Romania, but he moved to France very early with his wife. And he was recognized as one of the most influential musicians of the 30s and 40s. On the right side is another family member who was an important banker in Bucharest. And then we have Moses, as I said, the one who, Nissim's last son, the one who translated his will and who translated also his diary. So he's very important in terms of resource on the family story and genealogy. Moses and his siblings established the Nissim and Leah Halfon School for Girls, plus a fund for the erection of tombstones for those who could not afford it. Moses and Esther died in Paris. And it's interesting that Esther has the same name as her other cousin Esther, and they both died in 1941. That's interesting. So this is the announcement of their marriage, and this is the youngest son, no, not the youngest, actually, the one before the last son of Nissim, and that is Solomon, was born in Bucharest and lived in Bucharest. He was married to the Mendel family. Now, the Mendel family is also a very important family. His father-in-law was Consul of Sweden and Norway in Galatz, and she was also the bride, was also the granddaughter of Vita Salem and Rahel, Baroness of Morpurgo from Trieste. They had 5 children, all born in Bucharest, and he was also decorated with the title of officer of the Romanian crown. The last of the children, Alexander, was born in Bucharest, and he moved to Paris in 1873, and he was only able to apply for citizenship in 1912 and obtained it in 1924. So he had to live in Paris 50 years to obtain French citizenship. But this did not prevent him from being a reserve officer in the Romanian army as well, 1892 and 1901. He was more interested in arts than in business and showed some real theatrical talent. And he also had several children, but they did not necessarily stand out through something special. We have here Alexander Halfon's application for naturalization in 1912 from the French archives and his death record. Now, There are two more personalities I wanted to talk about to show you that we did not only have bankers, we also have important rabbis. And I want to tell you very shortly about two very important personalities. Haim Bejarano, I don't know if you heard about him. Haim Bejarano was a rabbi, scholar, and poet. After arriving in Romania as a refugee from the 1877 Russian-Turkish War, in 1878 he became a preacher at the Cahal Grande, I mentioned before, position which he held for the next 32 years, besides that of teacher of Hebrew and principal of the Spanish boys' school. In 1910, he was elected Grand Rabbi of Adrianopole, and from 1920, Chief Rabbi Locum Tenens of the Ottoman Empire. He was decorated by the Sultan with the Osmani and Majidi Order of the Sublime Porte. He impressed his contemporaries with his wide range of linguistic skills. He spoke 14 languages, including Arabic, as well as his philosophical, scientific, and literary ones. He was corresponding member of the Academy of Madrid and the Geographical Society of Paris, and doctor honoris causa of the Rabbinic Seminary of Vienna. His funeral was attended by all the diplomatic and religious representatives, as well as by over 10,000 people. And this is his picture. And then we have Sabbatai Jain, born in Plevna in 1883 and died in Tucuman in 1947. Rabbi, writer, playwright, editor. As his very name indicates, he descended from a family expelled from Jaén. He was first Grand Rabbi of the Spanish Jewish community of Monastir. Then he emigrated to Buenos Aires, where he functioned as Rabbi of Argentina and Uruguay between 1928 and 1931. Between 1931 and 1944, he was chief rabbi of the Spanish Jewish community of Romania. A convinced Zionist, he was also a fervent defender of the return of the Jews to Spain, which he visited in the 1930s. He was a prolific author who wrote songs, scholarly articles, mainly on the preservation of Ladino, but also of over 20 theater plays in Judeo-Spanish, which were later translated in various languages. In 1935, President Niceto Alcalá Zamora awarded him the Order of the Spanish Republic in rank of commander for his important work. During World War II, he fought together with Ashkenazi Chief Rabbi Alexander Shafran to save the Jews of Romania. And I think I will stop here because it's already 1 hour. Huh? Shall I continue? I can continue.
If you want to wind up quite quickly, because yeah, it's
well, I was just going to show you. Well, this is a picture of Sabbatai Jain, and I just wanted to tell you that also Jacob Levi Moreno is from Bucharest. So you know who Jacob Levi Moreno is, right? Yeah. So he was born in Bucharest in 1889, and he was the son of Moreno Nisim Levi and Paulina Iancu Wolf from Călăraș, who had moved to Romania during the Russo-Turkish War of 77-78. So this is also something that the Spanish community in Bucharest is proud of. Now, Spanish community was dismantled in 1948 by the communists following their settlement. Once the communists settled in, the first thing they closed the Sephardic community, and the Sephardim were allowed to have a section in the Ashkenazi community, and in 1965 even that section was closed. Today there are less than 50 Sephardim in all of Romania. That's the end of a 400-year-old history.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you, thank you, it's an enormous amount of information. Could you close your PowerPoint so that we can...
Sure, and this is a picture of Moreno.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you. That was an enormous amount of information. Before I sort of throw it out to the world, I have a number of questions. We have focused on the Sephardim, and I have to say, until a couple of years ago, I had literally no idea there were any Sephardim in Romania. And I'm a Sephardic Jew. We just hear about the Ashkenazi, and today we sort of barely mentioned the early history. Can you tell us when the Sephardim sort of first arrived in the 15th century? Were there already Ashkenazi Jews or Romaniot Jews or any other sort of Jews of living in what's now the territory of Romania and Moldavia?
So yes, the point is the Sephardim were the first, both in Wallachia and Moldova. They were the first to settle. As I said, we have mentions of merchants crossing, and those merchants were Sephardim before Sephardim. That is, they were from Spain, but before 1492. And there were also Ashkenazi Jews crossing Moldova and Wallachia before that. But the first who decided to settle were the Sephardim, both in Iași and in Bucharest. It was the Sephardim. So, and then the Ashkenazi Jews started coming in big numbers and started settling in separate communities, or at least separate structures, after the Cossack massacres of 1648-49. That's when they started coming and settling in the Romanian principalities, the Ashkenazim. But they indeed soon outnumbered the Sephardim. That is true.
Yeah. And the Sephardim essentially are clients of the Ottoman Empire. Is that a fair description?
Yes, most of them came from the Ottoman Empire, but as I said, because of the lack of rights in the Romanian principalities, there were quite a number of them who were registered as Austrian subjects, because Austria was the best in terms of protection. I mean, Austria always intervened for its Jewish subjects, unlike the other countries, which, like, as I said, France and Great Britain had embassies or legations in Romania, in the Romanian lands, but they did not protect the citizens. That is, they did not intervene when something happened. So Austria was the best protection, and many of them literally bought the protection of Austria. They paid to the Austrian legation to become Austrian subjects.
Okay. Is this information from the 1838 census, or you have it from other sources? Specifically, I'm asking about what particular families became subjects of which countries, so we can then say cross-reference. So I'm in London. I can look in the British archives for those that got British citizenship.
Well, we do not have much of Sephardim. Before 1838, we don't have anything. That is only if you, by chance, fall upon something like a private correspondence, like we have in the Halfon case, or some diary of something. In principle, the first census in the Romanian lands is the one in 1838. So that is the only one which gives you a clear view of who is subject of which country. Before that, we don't have documents. We only have maybe references.
Thank you. Has anyone looked in the Russian archives? Because I'm assuming that Wallachia was a sort of client state of the Russians once they kicked out the Turks. I mean, has anyone sort of looked to see if there's anything useful there?
Not really. And also, it's true that there were some, not many, but there were Sephardim in the Basarabian region, that is current Republic of Moldova. Not many, but there were a few. So it's possible that there is information there, but so far I don't know of anyone researching that. Okay. First of all, they need to know Russian, because everything before 1918 is in Russian. So I'm not sure. Yeah, you have to know Russian to do that. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Ton.
Thank you for your talk. Sorry I came late to your talk. So sorry if I ask things that you already answered. Can you give us an estimate of the size of the Sephardic population in Bucharest? That's one question. And the second is, will you publish this work that you have done, or has it already been published?
So the first question was, sorry.
The size of the Sephardic population of Bucharest.
Right. Well, a long history, actually. The Sephardic population never exceeded a few thousand. And at the beginning of World War II, for example, following First World War, the Jewish community in Romania reached about 780,000. So in 780,000, there were not more than 8,000 Sephardim. So that's the percentage. That's what it is. In principle, the Sephardic community had a much easier life in the Romanian lands than the Ashkenazim for two reasons. One was the language, because Ladino was closer to Romanian, and therefore they were not perceived as so different as the Ashkenazim, whose Yiddish was so different, so identifiable. Their accent was so identifiable, while with the Sephardim there was no accent. They could speak French. Many of them actually in the 19th century spoke French. The correspondence of the Halfon family is in French. They only have a few words in Ladino, but most of the correspondence is in French. So they spoke French. They were very much integrated in Romanian society. That is, they were not visible. They were, as I mentioned in Barash's report, they were dressing like the Romanians. They were speaking like the Romanians. So they were not visible. And also, because of their connections to the Ottoman Empire, they were much better financially than the Ashkenazi Jews. So the authorities had no problem with the Sephardic communities. We even have discourses in parliament which say if we only had the Sephardim, we would have naturalized them immediately. The problem is the Ashkenazi Jews. So this is valid both in Bucharest and in Iași, so in Moldova and in Wallachia. But it's the problem, the real problem is in Iași and in general in Moldova, because that's where most Ashkenazi Jews are. In Wallachia, even the Ashkenazi Jews were never very numerous. The biggest community was in Moldova, and that was because along the time, they were pushed by the Russian Empire's pogroms and massacres. So they came down towards Romanian Moldova, and therefore, at some point, there were, before the Second World War, in the old kingdom of Romania, there were about 250,000 Jews, which was a lot for a small country. And that's why there were so many problems. The problem was actually because Bucharest was always a small capital of a small country. Bucharest had never the experience of running a big territory and the multinational, or whatever you want to call it, population, multicultural, multinational population. Moldova did. Moldova had a lot of minorities, had a bigger land, so they had the experience of running minorities and land. Bucharest never had this experience, but Bucharest became the capital, so they mismanaged everything. They mismanaged in 1877, they mismanaged in 1918, so they mismanaged everything. That was the problem.
Thank you. And will you publish your research?
This one, so the work I've done on the Halfon family has not been published yet. I am publishing it now. I mean, it's ready. I am going to publish it in probably a few months. It will come out. It will come out in Romanian for the moment, but I will translate it in English as well. But anyway, this is something totally new. So this genealogy is totally new. I was able to correct some mistakes that have been transmitted from one generation to another because unfortunately in Romania, I don't know in other places, but in Romania we have historians who literally copy information from one another. They give the resource, they say, this is where I got the information, but they don't check. So it's already common knowledge that this or that, which is actually wrong. So I was able to correct a lot of information that was wrong. So I'm hoping that with this publication, I will manage to put some order in some of the details about this history that have been wrong for a long time. Now, in terms of, you were saying something about, yes, you were saying about, David was saying at the beginning about the lack of information of the Sephardic history in Romania. I have to tell you that it was not for nothing that I mentioned Bejarano. Bejarano was instrumental in promoting the information about the Sephardim in Romania. And the story is that in 1895, if I'm not wrong, Ángel Pulido Fernández, who was a Catholic senator of Spain, took a boat trip on the Danube, and he met Haim Bejarano. And Haim Bejarano told him about these communities that were in the Wallachia on the Danube. He showed him where the communities were, and he introduced him to these communities. And Pulido Fernandez was shocked. He said, "We never knew that there is such a Spanish population which speaks Spanish, has Spanish names, and despite the fact that they were expelled 300 years ago, they still think that Spain is the center of the world." And he wanted to convince the Senate, the Spanish Senate, to give citizenship to the Spanish Jews. He was, of course, denied, but this was the first attempt to recognize the Spanish Jews as Spanish, to reintegrate them in Spanish culture. And this was the discovery of Fernandez because he met Bejarano. Nobody knew about this. So indeed, it was a late discovery. And I can give you a whole lecture on that because Bejarano and two other people, actually several other people, but three people, especially Bejarano and two other people, wrote letters to Pulido Fernandez about the history of the community. And this is, again, a very important source for the history of the Sephardim in Romania.
Thank you.
All these letters are very, very full of information.
Bruce Kahan has a question.
Yeah.
Well, Felicia, thank you for introducing us to hundreds of Sephardim in and from Romania. Hundreds. It's quite extensive research. I guess my question is a generic question. How do we tell these stories of the Sephardim? In this case, what was the role, let's say, of the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, and the relations and the geographies of these places? These people weren't just, I mean, they were people, but they were responding to geopolitical and geographic and resource opportunities. The Halfon bank family, who were they banking aside from, you know, major governments? What do we do to tell the story, not by way of this family, that family, this era, that family? How do we tell the story from pattern? I love to recognize patterns. What are the patterns here that you can see from this kind of extensive research, that whether it was one family or another, there was a commonality of catalysts that they were responding to, that they were distinct from the Mediterranean patterns? I know that's a kind of a generic question, but what does your gut tell you about that?
Well, first of all, I can tell you that actually in the history of Romania, Jews in general, I mean Sephardim and Ashkenazim at the same time, because of the restrictions, because of the treatment given by the authorities, they were forced to be inventive, creative, to come with either totally new fields, new industries, new trades, new something, or to come with a new idea about an already existing field. For instance, they were the ones who understood the importance of giving a certain service to a bigger audience, a bigger group. And there were, for instance, small meals in villages. And Jews understood that if you have a meal that can serve 10 villages, it's much better than if you have 10 meals serving each village. So even in a field that was already existing, they came up with a new idea. So there were a lot of, from that point of view, there were a lot of opportunities because Romania was not a very advanced country. I mean, Wallachia and Moldova before, and then after their unification, when the Romanian state was born, it was not a very modern state. So there was a lot of opportunity in terms of modernization. And this is, for instance, how the Elias family brought the sugar industry in Romania. There is no history of sugar industry in Romania. They brought it at the end of the 19th century, and by 1901, Romania exported sugar. So this indeed was a matter of finding opportunities, and indeed there was quite a number, as I mentioned, through the direction of their migration. There were many who came to Romania from other countries because they saw this potential. And once they ran into trouble, they went back to the places they came from. So this migration has both routes, as I said. Some came and left, others came and stayed. Others started from Romania but had to go because there was not much opportunity for them here. So the pattern is that, in principle, when there was an opening, and that's throughout the history, not only in the 19th century when it's more documented, but even before, we saw that once they were invited because the economy needed a boost, and the wise rulers understood their role and invited them, gave them facilities, you have Jews coming in important numbers. But then when the economy starts moving, the authorities start imposing restrictions and then Jews start leaving, or anyway, finding ways to move their businesses elsewhere. So there are some patterns indeed, but you need to work more on the patterns, and that's something I can think of. Yes, we can look into the patterns much more. Yes.
Thank you, Felicia. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a request that you could share your PowerPoint.
I said so.
I don't
yes,
know
yes.
if you can sort of email it to Tom and myself, and we can just share it.
Absolutely, I said so. Yes, I'm going to give you the PowerPoint.
That's brilliant. Francis was asking a question about what work people did, but that's sort of been answered. Shall we go, because we've rather overextended. Tom, shall we go to a sort of final question from Bernard, and then we need to wind up so everyone can eat.
Okay.
Bernard, would you like to unmute? Great.
Right, Felicia, thank you so much for a high-speed presentation of hundreds of names, and I'm really looking forward to getting the PowerPoint, because that will give me a chance to look at some of them with more calm. What you have done, David said how surprised he was to hear about the Sephardic Jews. One of the things that you've done is to create for me a doubt about whether or not my father was lying, because his mother came from Chisinau in what was then Bessarabia, which was obviously Moldova and is once again Moldova, but was Ashkenazi. And he said that there were Sephardic connections in his family, because my mother's family was Sephardic. And I have to say, partly because I had experience of him in other areas, I never believed him. And now I'm going to actually start trying to do some serious research. There are lots of things I would like to ask. One is a general one, and it's about the question of intermarriage between Ashkenazim and Sephardim. Yeah. But there's a couple of names that kind of struck me. And one of them, the Halfons, I wondered whether the Daniel Halfon, the Chazan in Israel, who does wonderful Sephardic music on YouTube, which I really enjoy, is part of that family or from a completely different Halfon family. And I'm only going to, well, I'm going to ask you two other questions. One, you talked about Halfon being married to a Pereire in Paris. And yes, the Pereires were a very important Sephardic family, basically responsible for the creation of the railways in Paris.
Exactly,
so the Rue
yes,
is named after the first of the railway founders. Was that part of that family group? Because you talked about their influence in everything. Okay.
And also I have to tell you that the bride's great-grandfather was the one who invented the language for the deaf and dumb.
Yes, I had heard.
It was a Pereira, yes, it was a Rodriguez Pereira.
Okay.
And then her grandfather, so the son of the guy who invented the language for the deaf and dumb, the father was actually one of the founders of the Bank of Romania in 1865. So there are so many connections which are before and after the marriage. So there are many, many connections. Yes.
Okay, thanks. That's exciting. And my last question, which goes in almost the opposite direction, what was the involvement of the Sephardic community in the revolution of 1848 that you referred to?
They sponsored the revolution, mostly.
That's
not
what
only
I understood.
not only the Sephardim, also the Ashkenazi Jews. They sponsored the revolution. Yeah, and there is a nice story about another character, another personality from Bucharest, Hillel Manoach. I mentioned him on the side. Hillel Manoach was accused of helping the revolutionaries, which was true, of course. He did sponsor them, but he was finally acquitted of all accusations, and he was also made a member of the city council for a while, for a brief while. He was the only Jew who was a city council member for actually ever until 1923 when the Jews received citizenship. So there is a story there. And also the guy who
Thank you.
Yeah, the guy who facilitated the who was actually working for France, he was a French spy, was the Louis Mendel I mentioned, who was married to one of the Halfon girls. So yeah,
thank you. It's fascinating.
There are all kinds of
clearly
connections.
We've got
Absolutely.
a lot to learn.
Yeah, there are many connections which I found fascinating.
Thank you, Felicia. We are looking forward to your publication.
Yes,
especially
I'm hoping
the English version of it.
Yeah.
Oh, we can all learn Romanian.
I thank you for a lovely presentation, and I'm sure.
Yes. No. I said, just a second, there is a question. I said the Halfon family mentions, one of the Halfon diary mentions that the grandmother was from the Geron family, not that the Halfons are Gerons, but the first Halfon, Solomon Halfon, he had a grandmother who was born Geron. This was the answer. Yeah.
As always, we thank our patrons who are with us here and who make all of this possible. We thank our viewers on YouTube, and above all, we thank Felicia for a lively and wonderful talk, full of information. And we'll keep everyone informed of our plans for the next weeks. We hope to see you in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much.